Next, on Currents News, Pope Francis accepts the resignation of Cardinal Wuerl. What the Holy Father wrote is raising some questions. Unimaginable devastation left in the wake of Hurricane Michael. The death toll rises as a nearly obliterated Gulf Coast town struggles to recover.
One Brooklyn restaurant owner is related to a future saint. I'm Tim Harfman, and I'll have the story.
Brooklyn's Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio talks about the latest on the sex abuse investigation by New York's Attorney General with Ed Wilkinson. The news starts right now. Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Faublas. The resignation of Cardinal Wuerl was accepted by Pope Francis this morning, but the Holy Father is letting him stay on in Washington, at least for now. There's also a letter from the Pope that's getting a lot of attention. Melissa Butts is at the Vatican with the latest.
Pope Francis has accepted the resignation of Cardinal Wuerl from the Archdiocese of Washington. Through a letter, the Pope has asked him to remain in D.C. as an apostolic administrator until a new successor has been appointed. The Archbishop of Washington submitted the resignation request nearly 3 years ago at age 75, as canon law requires. After not being accepted, Cardinal Wuerl had sent an additional request on September 21st, asking Pope Francis to accept his resignation. The Cardinal had been facing recent pressure to resign since he was criticized for his handling of cases of abusive priests after the Pennsylvania grand jury report was released on August 14th. Pope Francis sent a letter to Wuerl dated October 12th saying, "I recognize in your request the heart of a shepherd who prioritizes actions that support, stimulate, and make the unity and mission of the Church grow." Pope Francis continues his letter, "You have sufficient elements to justify your actions and distinguish between what it means to cover up crimes or not to deal with problems and to commit some mistakes. However, your nobility has led you not to choose this way of defense. Of this, I am proud and thank you." This new interim administrator role will allow Wuerl to continue to run daily activities throughout the Archdiocese, but he will be unable to make serious changes that could affect the next Archbishop.
I think being a follower of Jesus is not easy in this secular world, but it is joyful. We may have many hurdles, but we can be at peace as we face those hurdles if we believe, if we know that Christ is with us.
Following the August scandals, Wuerl wrote a letter to U.S. bishops on August 30th, asking for forgiveness for my errors in judgment and for my inadequacies. Cardinal Wuerl will still be able to participate in Vatican events as he's still a cardinal. He's only just resigned from his role as the Archbishop of Washington, D.C. So we'll be keeping a close look to see who will be named the next Archbishop. At the Vatican, Melissa Butts, Currents News. Back to you in New York, Liz.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Today's big news leaves a lot of questions open. So to find some answers, we are joined by the editor-in-chief of the tablet and Nuestra Voz, Jorge Dominguez. He is in the studio. And the national correspondent for the tablet and Crux, Christopher White, who's standing by in Rome. Let's get right to it. Christopher, we're going to start with you. This is quite a remarkable letter. What do you make of the Holy Father's acceptance of Cardinal Wuerl's resignation?
That's right, Liz. I mean, I think it's a mistake to say unprecedented on the Vatican beat, but it's rare, it's certainly, that a letter would accompany a letter of resignation like this. And I think it goes to show just how much esteem Pope Francis has for Cardinal Wuerl, and just how much of an ally he saw in him and how painful and personal this decision was for him to, in fact, accept his resignation.
Jorge, an interesting part of that letter states that Wuerl will remain in the Archdiocese as an administrator. Now, why do you think that the Holy Father chose to keep him temporarily in charge?
It is a very unusual move in the sense that we knew that, Wuerl presented his resignation 3 years ago. So you may think that, they have the replacement ready. I think it is another sign of the Pope, personal esteem for Cardinal Wuerl, because he have done the same in Chile, but in Chile was totally different thing. They have the resignations of 5 bishops at the same time. They weren't ready to have 5 replacements, and they name administrators. But here is a total different situation. I think it is, again, another sign of the deep esteem for Cardinal Wuerl.
Christopher, in keeping with Jorge's train of thought, do you think this decision by Francis is a way for the church to hold bishops and cardinals accountable for their handling in this abuse crisis?
Well, I think, Liz, that in accepting the resignation, he does acknowledge what Cardinal Wuerl has already acknowledged, was that mistakes were made along the way, and if he could go back, he would do things differently. At the same time, he distinguishes between mistakes, which Wuerl is in fact guilty of, and cover-up, which is the case that we're seeing in Chile and other parts of the U.S., which Cardinal Wuerl has not been found guilty of or even accused of. So I think the Pope is very carefully making a distinction here between that.
Jorge, could this be related, in your opinion, to Pope Francis's recent decision to conduct a more in-depth investigation of the McCarrick case?
Probably, or maybe, Liz, I mean, the Vatican just announced that there's going to be the investigation about the McCarrick case, and they are going to show a lot of documents that are related to that case. And we don't know, but of course, Cardinal Wuerl was his successor in Washington. So in that sense, it could be, like an announcement that there are going to be things about Cardinal Wuerl in those documents too. But at the same time, as Chris was saying, I think that in the mind of the Pope here, he was saying, this is not McCarrick. Yeah. I mean, it's a totally different case. Wuerl was a person who committed some mistakes. He was not an abuser. It was a very different case, and I think that was in the mind of the Pope when he tried to do this so differently from other cases.
I have to get this last question in, and this is for both of you. What message does the Cardinal's resignation send? What do you see the impact of this decision being? Christopher, I want to start with you.
Well, let's go back to when the Pope accepted McCarrick's resignation from the College of Cardinals. I mean, then we got the message that even members of the College of Cardinals are not immune from being held accountable. Now, again, totally different scenario with Wuerl, but we're seeing folks at the highest level having to suffer the price of not protecting minors at the greatest degree possible. And I think that's another step in the right direction.
Jorge, really quickly, the impact.
Well, the impact is, for me, again, the difference between cases, but at the same time, this is another sign of the consequences of a culture that was in place and that we are trying to change after 20 years of scandals.
All right, Jorge Dominguez, Christopher White, fantastic insight.
Thank you.
You can read more of Christopher and Jorge's coverage in the tablet and online at thetablet.org. The utter devastation left behind by Hurricane Michael is becoming even more evident tonight. Now, here's the latest. At least 13 people are dead. That number is expected to climb higher as emergency workers search through debris. Over 1.5 million customers are without power in states stretching from Florida to Virginia, and the storm will probably end up costing at least $25 billion in economic losses. Now, the economic cost of the hurricane could impact households across the country. Our coverage begins with Natasha Chen.
Massive flooding, demolished infrastructure.
Roofs are gone, houses are flattened, trees are everywhere.
A trail of devastation from Florida to Virginia. A diminished Hurricane Michael moved out to sea as a post-tropical low Friday morning, but not before delivering a final blow to the storm-weary Carolinas and southern Virginia.
During Michael, we saw wind gusts of almost 70 miles an hour in the Outer Banks, rain totaling almost 10 inches.
The destruction the storm left behind is now coming into focus.
Unfortunately, we're still not through all the rubble. It's going to take us a while to get through it, and people are not going to be able to return home.
Several coastal towns in Florida are left unrecognizable, but almost none more so than Mexico Beach, ground zero for Michael's wrath.
It looks like a war zone.
Residents who rode out the storm left in shock.
This has been, I don't even know if I had the words to describe it. It's been the worst nightmare I've ever been through in my life.
With limited cell service.
Brandy. Brandy, it's Dad.
People are slowly getting in touch with loved ones.
If you would just post that on Facebook so everybody can see it, that we're okay, that we can't get any signal.
And starting to figure out just how to get on the road to recovery.
Are you guys going to make it?
I hope we're going to make it. I feel we will.
In Mexico Beach, Florida, I'm Natasha Chen, Currents News.
As you saw in that report, the hardest hit town is Mexico Beach, Florida. Residents there were beside themselves as they returned to their homes, only to discover everything is now gone. Brooke Baldwin was there and spoke to some of them.
From the air, it's clear much of Mexico Beach is gone. From the ground, we see up close the devastation to the seaside city. Home after home on this stretch of beach destroyed. Scott Botwell didn't make it out in time. The bridges closed and he was stuck.
Well, the thing is, this is a small little town, this is our little town. And so every restaurant's gone, every store's gone, and then all my neighbors, everybody's home's gone. And so when you think about it, all of their lives are gone.
Scott says he lost most of his possessions, but he will stay and rebuild.
So the stuff that I thought I had, some of the stuff that I thought was of value is even gone here. So.
All over the area, we heard this constant high-pitched beeping. They are fire alarms buried in the rubble, warnings that perhaps came too late. Again and again, I heard from survivors here. These three friends were searching for one of their homes. It was hard for them to even recognize the street.
No, there's not. There's so many memories here.
This woman named Sherry says she didn't have time to grab anything but some clothes and her jewelry box.
I just can't describe the feeling, and I know I'm not the only one here that feels the same. They've lost everything.
Mexico Beach is virtually cut off from the rest of the state. Though emergency crews are working throughout the area, roads are still blocked, power is out, and cell service is non-existent. Our satellite phone was the only way for these women to contact their loved ones.
I love you too. Bye.
Your daughter.
Okay,
That was Brooke Baldwin reporting from Mexico Beach, Florida. Many places of worship were demolished by the strong Category 4 storm. This is Central Pentecostal Ministries in the town of Lynn Haven, gutted by the storm. St. Andrew's United Methodist Church was also devastated by Michael, but their pastor says he will find a safe place for the community to worship on Sunday. The damage from what was Hurricane Michael is not just in the Florida Panhandle. Several states are affected, and the Knights of Columbus in Brooklyn are wasting no time to send aid, and you can help. The Knights are collecting monetary donations online at stfinbarbrooklyn.org/KOFC. Cash or checks can also be delivered to St. Finbar Church, located at 138 Bay 20th Street, Brooklyn, New York, 11214. New details about the limo crash that killed 20 people in Albany. Many had connections to the church. Among those killed, several were connected to parishes, schools, Catholic organizations within the Diocese of Albany. The community is calling the tragedy heartbreaking and held a candlelight vigil. According to a local pastor, so many people showed up that they ran out of candles. There's a lot more news headed your way. A Brooklyn man related to a soon-to-be saint is getting ready to celebrate his canonizations on Sunday. Bishop DiMarzio will join us in a few moments to talk about New York State's investigation into the sex abuse crisis, and New York City firemen who died due to a 9/11 related illness received a special honor today. Do you have a story idea? There must be something happening in your parish we should know about, and we always want to hear from you. Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org. We'll be right back. Images of the 7 future saints are on display in St. Peter's Square, among them Paul VI, Archbishop Oscar Romero, Vincenzo Romano, and Maria Caterina Casper. The tapestries displayed on the facade of the Basilica of St. Peter as Pope Francis prepares to preside over their canonization ceremony on Sunday. A restaurant owner in Bergen Beach, Brooklyn is waiting in anticipation for Sunday's canonization because he is related to one of the future saints. Currents News' Tim Harfman reports.
Tony Evangelista is planning a big celebration at the restaurant he owns, Il Posto, in Bergen Beach, Brooklyn. The occasion, his distant cousin, Nunzio Sobrizio, is being elevated to sainthood on Sunday. Tony refers to him as the Beato, which means blessed in Italian.
The Beato's mother, her name was Rosa Luciani. My great-grandmother's name was Filomena Luciani.
Nunzio was born in 1817 and became an orphan as a child. He later lived with his uncle, but was abused, taken out of school, and forced to work as a blacksmith. Nunzio eventually contracted an incurable disease in his leg, spent years in a hospital, and died when he was just 19 in 1836.
He said, "My suffering is nothing compared to what Jesus suffered." This was his philosophy.
Gone at a young age, but his legacy was not forgotten.
My grandfather always talked about the Beato, all since I can remember.
While they may have never met, Tony says he feels a special connection to Nunzio. For decades, he has carried around this worn picture of his cousin. Tony remembers that when his own father was in the hospital, his mother put a picture of Nunzio in the bed with him.
The next day, he was diagnosed with 3 broken ribs. And believe it or not, the picture she put with him was stuck right to where the ribs were broken.
Today, Tony says he listens to a special song every morning that's dedicated to his cousin.
In the song, he says, "An angel from God came and took him to heaven." That part gets to me.
So to honor Nunzio, Tony printed these prayer cards for the special occasion, and he plans on hanging this mural of Nunzio in the restaurant. Monsignor John Delendick, pastor of St. Jude in Canarsie, will be one of the people there to celebrate.
When he first told me this was going to happen, I said, "This is huge. Biggest thing that ever happened around here."
To me, I consider myself blessed, and I think a lot of it is from the Beato Nunzio.
In Bergen Beach, Brooklyn, Tim Harfman, Currents News.
Net TV will broadcast the canonizations of Oscar Romero, Paul VI, and other new saints. The coverage airs on Sunday, October 14th, beginning at 5 p.m. on Net TV. The sex abuse crisis is still gripping the Catholic Church, and here in New York, the district attorney has asked that all 8 dioceses in the state turn over its files for evaluation. For more on that, Ed Wilkinson is here with the Bishop of Brooklyn, Nicholas DiMarzio, for this week's Into the Deep. Hi, Ed.
Thank you, Liz, and we're here with Bishop DiMarzio today. Bishop, I want to talk to you about the New York State Attorney General has said that she wants to study the problem of sex abuse in the church, and they've subpoenaed some records, I guess, from the diocese. Have you gotten that subpoena?
Yes, we have.
Mm-hmm. And what are they asking you for?
Well, it's quite a bit of information. Starting in 1950 to the present, they want any record we have of sexual abuse, allegations of sexual abuse against the priest, deacon, bishop, layperson, and employee of the diocese. It's a very comprehensive subpoena. We have to redact these records, have them scanned, put on special computer programs so they can be searched by them. It's a tremendous amount of work. We've gotten maybe one extension at least, because it's impossible to do the work overnight. It's very complicated.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is happening across the United States. I guess after the Pennsylvania report, the grand jury report was it was pretty horrendous to read that. But you see this happening in a lot of states, and the church is being very cooperative with civil authorities, aren't they?
Well, we're trying. We've always cooperated. All our records of any abuse have already been given to the district attorney in the 2 counties, Brooklyn and Queens, that we are in. So there's nothing to hide, except that I wish that this was done with other organizations. We are the only one seem to be highlighted. Mm-hmm. We know that there's a much greater amount of abuse in the public schools, and that's not happening. Some other organizations, why don't they do the whole thing instead of just picking at the church?
Mm-hmm. What do you think they're looking for? I mean, what do they hope to come out? Because the statute of limitations has run out on most of these cases. So, I mean, what's the point of an attorney general doing a study?
They're really
like
not saying what they're looking for. I mean, you could surmise. I mean, obviously looking for some kind of malfeasance, something. They're not trying to help us. They're not trying to say, what did you do good? They're trying to find out what we did wrong. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we don't know what we did wrong until you look at some of these cases. I think we have a very good record of dealing with anybody who's come forward asking for settlements. We're working on that program right now. It's not almost all finished. So we're not hiding anything. There was, and again, I looked at some of the statistics to see what we knew. Before 2002, we knew about 16% of the cases that now are part of our whole universe of cases. After 2002, in those 2 years, then people came forward, another 43%. And now with the program of reconciliation, another 43% came in. So again, how do you hide what you don't know? It just was not ever reported. So that's where the problem is. And to see, again, some of the narrative that's been made, even by Hollywood and Spotlight, like we were moving people around like checkers to keep them protected. I mean, that just did not happen.
Yeah. There's some talk, I guess, in the Pennsylvania report really called for a change in the statute of limitations. And that seemed to be really the focus of that report, because the cases there were not prosecutable either. Is that likely to happen here, that New York State is going to make a big push to undo the statute of limitations?
It seems that that's what the reports are, the news reports are. This is the governor's idea. Hopefully it applies to everyone, not just to the church, but that seems to be the bottom line.
Well, you know, you always hear they say, well, the church is against this changing the law, but actually the church's position is that if it applies to everybody, then they're for the relaxation.
We'll be reluctant still, but still, if everybody's in, well, then let's see what happens. We've tried to settle all the cases that we know about. There may be other cases that come out.
Are you confident that the measures that the diocese has taken has really stopped this problem?
Since 2002, we have one verifiable case of abuse by a priest. That's it. 16 years without any real-time cases. I don't think anybody can do better than that. Nationally, we see the same thing. It's a minimal amount, the whole country. The latest CARA report, they report on this every year. We see that this is really extinguished. It's really history.
Okay, thank you, Bishop. Liz, that's the latest on this topic that keeps coming up in the headlines. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Ed, and thank you, Bishop DiMarzio, as always, for sharing that very important information. Still to come on Currents News, a 9/11 hero who lost his life years after the tragedy, receiving a special honor today in Brooklyn. Details when we come right back. A street in Brooklyn now pays special tribute to a hero. The corner of 40th Street and 4th Avenue in Sunset Park is now named after Thomas Phelan. On September 11th, he worked for Circle Line Statue of Liberty steering ships. On that day, his ship was transformed from tourist boat to life vessel, going back and forth to Lower Manhattan, bringing hundreds of survivors to safety.
It means an awful lot for the family and the community because it keeps his name alive. You know, I don't think he needs much help keeping it alive, but it will for generations to come.
2 years after the attacks, Phelan realized his dream of becoming a firefighter, but as his career was flourishing, his health was declining. Tommy Phelan passed away earlier this year from a 9/11 related illness. He was just 45 years old. We will always remember him and are forever grateful for his brave service. That is Currents News. I'm Liz Faublas. Thank you so much for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.